Merry Christmas, everyone. All in Arrowhead here. Week 16 delivered another dramatic set of games as we head into the final stretch of the NFL season, and the playoff picture is starting to really take shape. The Eagles continued their dominant run in the NFC East, taking care of business against Washington to solidify their grip on the division, while the Bills held steady in the AFC with a hard-fought win over the Browns to stay firmly in the mix for top seeding. The Seahawks pulled off an overtime thriller against the Rams, cementing their playoff berth and demonstrating their ability to execute in high-pressure moments, while the Rams remained comfortably in the postseason picture despite the narrow loss. Meanwhile, the Texans and Jaguars all posted important victories that strengthened their playoff positioning in the AFC, with each team showing balance on both sides of the ball, from efficient passing to opportunistic defense. In the NFC, the Vikings, Panthers, and Bears all had meaningful games, with the Panthers and Vikings fighting to stay relevant and the Bears trying to maintain seeding flexibility, while the Saints, Buccaneers, and Packers wrapped up competitive campaigns with wins and losses that will impact the final playoff seedings. This week also saw the Cowboys officially eliminated from playoff contention after their loss, leaving them focused on finishing the season strong. As we head into Week 17, the stage is set for pivotal matchups that will finalize division titles, playoff seedings, and home field advantages, and fans can expect plenty of high-stakes action as several teams aim to secure their postseason fate before the regular season comes to a close. The last 2 weeks of the season promise to be full of drama, with every remaining game carrying serious implications for the playoffs. Let's get into the games! Dallas heads into Week 17 at 6-8-1 and officially eliminated from playoff contention following a 34-17 loss to the Chargers in Week 16 that felt closer early than the final score suggests, as Dak Prescott threw for over 240 yards and 2 touchdowns and moved the ball efficiently in the first half, but the offense completely stalled after the break with multiple 3-and-outs, continued struggles on third down, and a run game that never found consistency, putting more pressure on the passing attack to carry extended drives. Defensively, the Cowboys had trouble getting off the field, allowing sustained possessions that flipped field position and drained momentum, while missed tackles and penalties extended drives that eventually turned a competitive game into a comfortable margin for the opponent. Washington comes in at 4-11 after a 29-18 loss to the Eagles in Week 16, where the Commanders stayed within striking distance early but never truly seized control, where quarterback Marcus Mariota threw for 7 of 14 passes with 95 yards, while the offense finished with 220 total yards, failing to generate explosive plays, and struggling in pass protection as pressure disrupted timing and forced quick throws, which limited their ability to attack downfield. The Commanders' defense battled but spent too much time on the field due to offensive inefficiency, especially in the second half, where they allowed long drives that prevented any late comeback push. With both teams now playing out the string and evaluating pieces for the future, Dallas's passing game has at least shown the ability to produce yardage when given time, and that slight offensive edge gives them the advantage in a matchup that may come down to execution rather than motivation. So I'm picking the Cowboys to grab a late season win and move to 7-8-1, while Washington drops to 4-12. The Lions come into Week 17 at 8-7 after a wild Week 16 loss to the Steelers, in which Detroit's offense piled up yards and big plays, but came up short in the final moments, as quarterback Jared Goff completed 34 of 54 passes for 364 yards and 3 touchdowns, with receivers Isaac Tisla, Khalif Raymond, and Jahmyr Gibbs all finding the end zone. That puts the Lions squarely on the bubble heading into this penultimate weekend of the regular season. Detroit's ability to generate explosive passing yardage and multiple touchdown connections underscored just how potent their offense can be, but the defense ceded critical rushing and passing yardage at times that allowed Pittsburgh to capitalize late. The Vikings, meanwhile, enter Week 17 at 7-8 after a hard-fought 16-13 win over the Giants, in which Minnesota leaned on a steady ground and kick game to grind out points. with quarterback J.J. McCarthy completing 9 of 14 passes for 109 yards and an interception, and kicker Will Reichard converting 3 field goals to account for all of Minnesota's scoring and a disciplined drive in the fourth quarter that allowed them to hold on, while the Vikings defense stepped up by shutting down New York's passing attack and forcing key stops when it mattered most. Even as injuries to key personnel tested Minnesota's depth, both teams have shown they can be competitive when the defenses tighten up and their offenses execute in critical situations. But with the Lions' explosive passing game still capable of putting up big numbers if they can clean up their late-game execution, I'm taking Detroit to rebound and improve to 9-7, while Minnesota falls to 7-9. The Denver Broncos come into Week 17 at 12-3 after a surprising 34-20 loss to the Jaguars in Week 16 that snapped their long win streak and exposed some cracks in both execution and decision-making, as Denver's defense, which had been a strength all season, struggled at times to slow explosive plays, and the offense was hampered by a late interception that stalled a potential comeback, and a 352-yard performance from Bo Nix and key contributions from his top targets, leaving the Broncos looking to rebound with home field advantage and still in control of the AFC's top seed if they can close the season strong. Leaving the Broncos looking to rebound with home field advantage and still in control of the AFC's top seed if they can close the season strong. On the other sideline, the Kansas City Chiefs enter Week 17 at 6-9 and out of playoff contention after a 26-9 loss to the Titans that featured a depleted offensive core and the absence of both Patrick Mahomes and Gardner Minshew to season-ending knee injuries, forcing third-string quarterback Chris Oladokun into action, where he completed 11 of 16 passes for 111 yards in relief, while the Chiefs' offense struggled to find rhythm, converting only field goals from Harrison Butker and failing to sustain meaningful drives against Tennessee's defense. With pass protection issues and limited playmakers available, converting only field goals from Harrison Butker and failing to sustain meaningful drives against Tennessee's defense. With pass protection issues and limited playmakers available, Kansas City's unit was consistently pushed off schedule, and Minshew only had 15 passing yards before Oladokun even entered, underscoring how much the roster has been impacted by injury and inconsistency. In this matchup, Denver's motivation to secure the best possible seed and finish atop the AFC West contrasts sharply with Kansas City's situation, but Oladokun's efficient relief performance and the Chiefs' defense showing flashes of life through disciplined coverage and pressure, I'm picking Kansas City to pull off a gritty home win and move to 7-9, while Denver slips to 12-4, showing resilience despite adversity and setting a tone of next season promise. The Texans continue to roll into Week 17 after a gritty 23-21 win against the Raiders in Week 16 that saw Houston's defense set the tone early with Derek Stingley Jr.'s pick 6 and kept their 7-game winning streak alive behind a clutch offense that didn't find the end zone until late in the fourth quarter. Stingley's interception return and 3 Kaimi Fairbairn field goals helped offset a sluggish performance that still produced enough yards and first downs to hang on and keep Houston's playoff hopes bright with a 10-5 record. Stroud finished with 187 passing yards, and the defense forced timely stops and turnovers that turned momentum. On the other side, the Chargers enter this one after a convincing 34-17 win over the Cowboys in Week 16 that elevated them to 11-4 and put them firmly in the playoff picture, as Justin Herbert showed why he's one of the league's most efficient quarterbacks this season, throwing for 300 yards and 2 touchdowns and adding a rushing score, while the Chargers piled up one of their season's most complete offensive performances, getting contributions from Quentin Johnston and Ladd McConkey in the passing game, and steady rushing production that kept Dallas's defense off balance. Los Angeles' defense also delivered, containing Dak Prescott's big plays and forcing stops that allowed the offense to build and maintain a lead through all 3 phases, making this Texans-Chargers matchup a fascinating contrast of Houston's resilience and defensive playmaking versus Los Angeles' explosive and balanced attack. With both teams locked in tight battles for playoff positioning and different strengths on display, I'm leaning toward the Chargers to improve to 12-4, while Houston stays strong at 10-6, keeping their postseason push alive. Baltimore comes into Week 17 at 7-8 after a 28-24 loss to the Patriots in Week 16, a game that once again emphasized how central the Ravens' identity is built around their run game, as Derrick Henry powered the offense with 18 carries for 128 yards and 2 touchdowns, consistently setting the tone and allowing Baltimore to control stretches of the game, while Zay Flowers provided balance and explosiveness with 7 receptions for 84 yards and an 18-yard rushing touchdown that showcased his versatility within the offense. The Ravens' passing game took a hit when Lamar Jackson exited before halftime with a back injury, and while Tyler Huntley was efficient in relief by completing 9 of his 10 attempts for 65 yards, the offense lacked a late-game punch, with turnovers and stalled drives preventing Baltimore from fully capitalizing on its strong early production. Defensively, the Ravens showed moments of disruption and pressure, but once again struggled to close out the final quarter, an issue that has repeatedly surfaced during close losses this season and has played a major role in their sub-500 record. Green Bay, meanwhile, enters at 9-5-1 after a 22-16 overtime loss to the Bears in Week 16, a game that reflected the Packers' preferred blueprint when things are working, as they leaned heavily on a physical rushing attack that produced 192 yards on 44 attempts and allowed them to dictate tempo and possession, while Malik Willis filled in at quarterback and delivered a highly efficient performance, completing 9 of his 11 passes for 121 yards and a touchdown, while keeping the offense on schedule for most of the night. Despite that efficiency, Green Bay struggled to finish drives late and couldn't convert sustained control into points after the third quarter, allowing a winnable game to slip away due to execution issues rather than a lack of production. This Week 17 matchup shapes up as a contrast between Baltimore's reliance on Henry and its need for cleaner late-game execution versus Green Bay's ability to control games on the ground and stay structurally sound offensively. And with the Packers showing a more stable offensive approach and fewer question marks entering this week, I'm picking Green Bay to grind out a win here, improving to 10-5-1, while the Ravens would drop to 7-9. The Buccaneers enter Week 17 after a tight 23-20 loss to the Panthers in Week 16, where Tampa Bay's offense showed flashes but ultimately couldn't sustain drives late, as Baker Mayfield completed 18 of 26 passes for 145 yards with a touchdown, while Sean Tucker punched in a short rushing score and Mike Evans continued to be a focal point in the passing game. But costly turnovers and defensive lapses on third down held the Bucs back and left them trying to balance aggressive play calling with ball security, a trend they'll need to fix against Miami, which comes off a rough 45-21 loss to the Bengals in Week 16, in which rookie Quinn Ewers making his first start under center, while the Dolphins' offense couldn't keep pace after halftime, turning the ball over multiple times and allowing the Bengals' offense to flourish, highlighting Miami's need for greater consistency on both sides of the ball. Tampa Bay's defense allowed 275 total yards and gave up the game-sealing interception late, showing both moments of strong coverage and costly breakdowns in crunch time, while Miami's unit, despite flashes early, couldn't contain Cincinnati's counterpunch in the second half. Looking ahead in this matchup, the Bucs will aim to leverage their experienced playmakers and improved red zone efficiency to exploit a Dolphins defense that has been inconsistent at stopping opponents, while Miami will need more from Ewers in its front seven if it hopes to snap its skid. I am leaning Tampa Bay to get back in the win column and move to an 8-8 record, while Miami falls to 6-10. The Patriots enter Week 17 at 12-3 after a statement 28-24 win over the Ravens in Week 16, a game that not only showcased their resilience and offensive firepower, but secured their ticket to January football, as Drake May delivered his most productive outing of the season by completing 31 of 44 passes for 380 yards and 2 touchdowns, consistently keeping New England on schedule and attacking downfield, while the offense surged late with 2 fourth-quarter touchdown drives to flip an 11-point deficit. The Patriots moved the ball efficiently through the air, protected the football late, and complemented May's passing with just enough balance to control the tempo in crunch time. While defensively, they tightened up in the second half and made the necessary stops to close the game out. The Jets, meanwhile, limp into Week 17 at 3-12 after a lopsided 29-6 loss to the Saints, a game that highlighted ongoing offensive struggles as New York failed to generate sustained drives, managed only 2 field goals, and never found rhythm through the air or on the ground, putting constant strain on a defense that was forced to spend extended stretches on the field. New York's inability to protect Brady Cook, convert on early downs, or capitalize on limited scoring opportunities allowed the game to get away from them quickly, and the lack of offensive efficiency has become a defining issue as the season winds down. This matchup features 2 teams heading in opposite directions, with New England playing confident, decisive football on offense and showing the ability to close games late, while the Jets continue to search for answers and consistency. And I'm going with the Patriots to stay hot, take care of business in Week 17, and move to 13-3, leaving the Jets to fall to 3-13 as their difficult season continues. The Pittsburgh Steelers enter Week 17 at 9-6 after a dramatic 29-24 win over the Lions in Week 16 that showcased both the offensive and defensive playmakers who have kept this season alive, as veteran quarterback Aaron Rodgers completed 27 of 41 passes for 266 yards and a touchdown, while running back Jaylen Warren exploded for 143 rushing yards and 2 long touchdown runs. And Kenneth Gainwell added a highlight reel receiving score. All of which helped Pittsburgh pull away in the second half, an extended streak of non-losing seasons. Defensively, the Steelers contributed with the safety and timely stops that kept Detroit's potent offense in check down the stretch and clutched up when it mattered most. Cleveland comes into this matchup at 3-12 after a narrow 23-20 loss to the Bills in Week 16, in a game where rookie quarterback Shedeur Sanders threw for 157 yards and a touchdown, but also had 2 interceptions. And the Browns' offense was largely paced by modest production on the ground due to the early loss of Quinshon Judkins, which forced Cleveland to lean on secondary rushers and a passing attack that couldn't consistently break through Buffalo's defensive pressure. Although the Browns moved the ball at times and got within striking distance late, they couldn't convert on key downs, and Buffalo's defense made enough stops to preserve the win. With Pittsburgh's offensive balance, a strong rushing attack that forces defenses to respect Rodgers in the passing game, and Cleveland still shaky protecting the football, this Week 17 matchup should favor the more complete Steelers unit. So I'm picking Pittsburgh to improve to 10-6 and keep momentum heading into the final week of the season, while the Browns fall to 3-13. The Jaguars head into Week 17 off a convincing 34-20 win over the Broncos in Week 16 that not only highlighted Jacksonville's offensive balance and growing confidence, but also guaranteed them a playoff spot, as Trevor Lawrence completed 23 of 36 passes for 279 yards and 3 touchdowns, and also added a rushing score while spreading the ball around to multiple playmakers, Parker Washington in particular, who had a breakout afternoon with a career-high 145 receiving yards and a touchdown, and Jacksonville's defense created 2 takeaways while helping swing field position and momentum throughout the game. Jacksonville's offense maintained consistent efficiency, sustaining long drives and converting 4 or 5 attempts in the red zone, and the Jaguars extended their 6-game win streak while boosting their AFC South lead and keeping strong control of their playoff positioning with explosive production from both the passing and complementary run game. The Colts, meanwhile, come off a 48-27 loss to the 49ers, a game in which they showed flashes on offense. Phillip Rivers threw for 277 yards and 2 touchdowns, and Indianapolis managed multiple scoring drives, but were ultimately outclassed as San Francisco's offense piled up points and total yardage, and the Colts' defense struggled to contain big plays and failed to create enough stops late. Indianapolis's loss dropped them deeper toward the edge of playoff contention, And while there were some encouraging offensive moments, consistent pressure on the quarterback and further defensive lapses remain concerns. This Week 17 matchup sets up as a contrast between Jacksonville's increasingly efficient offense led by Lawrence and balanced playmakers against a Colts team that still has to tighten up on both sides of the ball. And I'm leaning towards the Jaguars here to keep their momentum rolling and stay firmly in control of the AFC South race, with Jacksonville improving to 12-4 and the Colts falling to 8-8 in a game that underscores where each team currently stands. The New Orleans Saints enter Week 17 at 5-10 off a commanding 29-6 win over the Jets in Week 16, a game in which rookie quarterback Tyler Shough threw for a season-high 308 yards and a touchdown, and wide receiver Chris Olave led the offensive charge with 10 receptions for 148 yards and 2 scores, and kicker Charlie Smythe tied a franchise record by converting 5 field goals as New Orleans steadily built its lead. Saints defense completely shut down New York's scoring offense and held the Jets to just a pair of field goals, carrying momentum for a third straight victory and showing a more balanced offensive attack, with effective downfield passing and complementary rushing production that kept drives alive. Tennessee, meanwhile, arrives at Week 17 at 3-12 after a surprising 26-9 victory over the Chiefs in Week 16 that snapped an 11-game home losing streak and featured a polished performance from rookie quarterback Cam Ward, who completed 21 of 28 passes for 228 yards and 2 touchdowns, while running back Tony Pollard paced the ground game with 102 rushing yards as the Titans controlled possession and put sustained pressure on Kansas City's backup quarterback, and Tennessee's defense contributed with a safety and consistently halted drives throughout the afternoon. Both teams come into this matchup having played well in Week 16 with decisive wins on both sides of the ball, but New Orleans' recent offensive rhythm behind Shough and Olave, coupled with a defense that keeps opponents off the scoreboard, gives the Saints an edge in consistency and playmaking ability, so I'm picking the Saints to improve to 6-10, while the Titans fall to 3-13. The Seattle Seahawks come into Week 17 at 12-3 and having already clinched a playoff berth with their wild 38-37 overtime win over the Los Angeles Rams in Week 16, a game where Sam Darnold finished with 270 passing yards, 2 touchdowns, and 2 interceptions, and ignited Seattle's incredible comeback. Kenneth Walker carried the load on the ground with 100 rushing yards and a touchdown, and big plays from Jackson Smith and Jigba, including 96 receiving yards and a touchdown after halftime, helped fuel a rally from a double-digit fourth-quarter deficit, showing the Seahawks' resilience on both sides of the ball and their ability to flip momentum in dramatic fashion. Defensively, Seattle bent late but came up with enough stops and strategic pressure to force extended possessions and ultimately the overtime opportunity that secured their status atop the NFC West and maintained control of their playoff destiny. Carolina enters at Week 17 at 8-7 after a crucial 23-20 Week 16 victory over the Buccaneers that saw Bryce Young throw for 191 yards and 2 touchdowns to key targets like Jatavian Sanders and Teterola McMillan, while kicker Ryan Fitzgerald's 48-yard field goal late in the fourth quarter proved decisive in a tight divisional battle, and Lathan Ransom's interception with under a minute left iced the win, underscoring the Panthers' capacity to execute in high-leverage situations and keep their own playoff hopes alive. Carolina's defense limited Tampa Bay's offense to under 300 total yards and forced timely punts and field goals, while the Panthers' offense showed enough balance, mixing short passing and efficient drives to stay in front of a close game. Both teams are coming in with confidence from dramatic Week 16 wins and have shown the ability to make big plays when needed. But Seattle's explosive late comeback and demonstrated depth on offense give them the edge and consistency heading into this cross-conference matchup. So I'm picking the Seahawks to improve to 13-3, while the Panthers fall to 8-8. Arizona heads into Week 17 off a competitive 26-19 loss to Atlanta in Week 16, where their offense showed flashes but couldn't finish drives consistently, with quarterback Jacoby Brissett completing 16 of 31 passes for 203 yards, a touchdown with an interception, while the run game struggled to generate chunk plays and the defense was worn down by Bijan Robinson's ground attack that included a receiving touchdown and late rushing score for the Falcons. Arizona's secondary also gave up multiple big passing plays that extended drives and eventually led to the deciding touchdown late in the fourth quarter, and the Cardinals dropped to 3 wins on the season while extending their losing streak. Cincinnati, meanwhile, rolls into Week 17 after a dominant performance against Miami in Week 16, where they posted a 45-21 win fueled by a much more explosive offensive showing from Joe Burrow, who threw for over 300 yards and 4 touchdowns, while the run game also contributed, and the defense that had struggled earlier in the year showed improved play by getting off the field on third downs and limiting big plays despite some early resistance. That victory boosted the Bengals' confidence and highlighted big contributions from key playmakers across the board and has them playing more balanced football as the season winds down. Even though both teams have had their share of ups and downs, the Bengals' ability to execute more consistently on offense and tighten up on defense gives them the edge in this matchup, and I'm picking Cincinnati to improve to 6-10, while Arizona falls to 3-13. The Giants roll into Week 17 against the Raiders after a tough 16-13 loss to the Vikings in Week 16, in which their offense was completely stifled, finishing with just 141 total yards and a minuscule 13 net passing yards, as rookie quarterback Jackson Dart completed 7 of 13 passes for 33 yards with an interception and was sacked multiple times under pressure, while their defense made a game of it with Brian Burns notching 2 sacks and a strip sack touchdown that kept New York within striking distance before the Vikings edged ahead late with a field goal. The Giants' inability to sustain drives or convert in key situations extended their losing streak and underscored systemic issues on offense that have plagued them all season, even as they've struggled to find consistency and identity. Meanwhile, the Raiders are limping through a miserable season and suffered a 9th straight loss in Week 16 as they fell 23-21 to the Texans despite flashes from Geno Smith, who completed 16 of 23 throws for 201 yards with 2 touchdowns, and rookie running back Ashton Jeanty, who led the Raiders with 128 rushing yards and a score while adding a long 60-yard reception. But Las Vegas's defense could not contain Houston's opportunistic scoring and allowed a pick 6 from Derek Stingley Jr. that set the tone, and their offense remains among the league's least productive units overall. Both teams enter this matchup with major questions on both sides of the ball, but with draft positioning implications and little left to play for in terms of playoff hopes, I am leaning toward the Raiders to end their skid and improve to 3-13, while the Giants fall to 2-14. The Philadelphia Eagles enter Week 17 at 10-5, coming off a 29-18 win over the Washington Commanders that not only clinched them the NFC East title again, but featured one of their most complete performances of the season, as Jalen Hurts threw for 185 yards and 2 touchdowns, while Saquon Barkley rumbled for 132 yards and a score, en route to surpassing 1,000 rushing yards for the 5th time in his career. A.J. Brown hauled in 9 catches for 95 yards to keep drives alive, and the Eagles outgained Washington 385-220, showing a balanced attack and timely defensive stops that helped them take control after a halftime deficit and stay in the playoff mix with continued momentum. On the other sideline, the Buffalo Bills come into this matchup at 11-4 after a hard-fought 23-20 road win over the Browns in Week 16, in a game where Josh Allen threw for only 130 passing yards and managed the offense effectively in key completions and touches when needed. The Bills' defense stepped up in the second half to contain Cleveland's adjustments, and Buffalo's ability to make enough plays in critical moments down the stretch helped preserve the win and strengthen their playoff positioning with another gritty performance. There's a reason why this is the game of the week. Both teams showed resiliency in Week 16 and complementary football that kept them in control. Philadelphia with a mix of efficient passing and dynamic rushing plus opportunistic defense, and Buffalo with clutch execution and a defense that rose when it mattered, setting up a high-stakes Week 17 matchup between two well-rounded attacks. Given how both clubs have balanced production and clutch playmakers, I'm leaning toward the Eagles' home field consistency and recent surge to give them the edge here. So I'm picking Philadelphia to improve to 11-5, while the Bills fall to 11-5, but with a much steeper road to any higher seed. Chicago comes into this matchup fresh off a dramatic 22-16 overtime win against Green Bay in Week 16, a game defined by resilience and timely execution, as Caleb Williams finished 19 of 34 for 250 yards and 2 touchdowns, and helped engineer a late comeback by leading scoring drives in the fourth quarter and overtime, highlighted by a decisive touchdown strike to DJ Moore to end the game. The Bears showed balance offensively by staying aggressive through the air while leaning on situational runs to extend drives, and defensively they did just enough late, forcing key stops after giving up chunks of yardage earlier, ultimately capitalizing on Green Bay's mistakes to seal the win. San Francisco, meanwhile, is coming off one of its most complete offensive performances of the season in a 48-27 win over Indianapolis, as Brock Purdy was in full command of the offense, completing 25 of 34 passes for 295 yards and 5 touchdowns, while efficiently distributing the ball across the field, and Christian McCaffrey complemented that effort with 117 rushing yards, while also finding the end zone twice as a receiver, allowing the 49ers to consistently finish drives and pile up points. San Francisco totaled 440 yards of offense and played fast and decisive offensively, though the defense allowed some production before tightening up late and adding a score of its own to put the game away. This matchup pits Chicago's late-game confidence and clutch playmaking against San Francisco's explosive, rhythm-driven offense, and while the Bears have shown they can win tight games under pressure, I am leaning towards the 49ers to carry over their offensive momentum, control the flow of the game, and come out on top in a matchup that could have major playoff implications, pushing San Francisco to 12-4 while Chicago slips to 11-5. The Los Angeles Rams enter Week 17 at 11-4 after a 38-37 overtime loss to the Seahawks in Week 16, a game that showcased their offensive firepower but also exposed weaknesses in pass defense and late-game execution. Quarterback Matthew Stafford threw for 457 yards with 3 touchdowns, connecting repeatedly with Puka Nacua, who totaled 225 receiving yards and 2 touchdowns, while wide receiver Xavier Smith added 57 yards on 2 catches. Kyren Williams contributed 70 rushing yards and kept the ground game balanced, but the Rams defense struggled to contain Seattle late, giving up 38 points, including a crucial fourth-quarter touchdown and the overtime game winner, though they recorded 4 sacks and 2 interceptions, showing flashes of disruption. The Falcons, now 6-9 after a 26-19 win against the Cardinals, relied on Kirk Cousins' 197 passing yards and 2 touchdowns, and Tyler Algier and Bijan Robinson combined for 155 rushing yards to control the clock and move the chains effectively. Defensively, Atlanta forced a turnover and tightened coverage in the second half, limiting big plays and capitalizing on the Cardinals' mistakes, with the Rams still capable of explosive scoring but needing to improve late-game decision-making, and Atlanta showing resilience and strong rushing efficiency. The matchup presents a clash between Los Angeles' offensive firepower and Atlanta's opportunistic defense. The Rams' urgency to finish strong and secure playoff positioning gives them the edge, improving to 12-4, while the Falcons fall to 6-10. As Week 17 arrives, the playoff race is no longer about projection but about execution, with nearly every major scenario across both conferences capable of being resolved this weekend if the right results fall into place. In the NFC, Seattle sits at the center of everything, as the Seahawks can clinch the NFC West outright with a win paired with either a Rams loss or tie and a 49ers loss or tie, while even a tie could be enough if both Los Angeles and San Francisco lose. And on top of that, Seattle still has a path to locking up the number 1 overall seed and home field advantage if they win. The Rams stumble, and San Francisco ties, making the Seahawks the most powerful swing team in the conference. Chicago's path in the NFC North is far more direct, as the Bears can wrap up the division with a win, and even without one, a tie combined with the Packers tie or any Green Bay loss would still hand Chicago the crown, keeping pressure squarely on their rival. In the NFC South, Carolina is in position to clinch the division with a win and a Tampa Bay loss or tie, and even with a tie of their own if the Buccaneers lose outright, while Green Bay's postseason hopes hinge on simply avoiding a loss, as a win or tie guarantees a playoff berth, though Detroit stumbling could also open the door regardless of the Packers' result. Over in the AFC, Denver remains the league's biggest power broker, with scenarios that allow the Broncos to clinch the AFC West with a win and a Chargers loss or tie, even with a tie if Los Angeles loses. And even more dramatically, Denver can secure the number 1 seed outright with a win combined with losses or ties from the Chargers, Jaguars, Bills, and a Patriots loss, a scenario that would completely lock down the conference. New England also sits on the brink in the AFC East, needing only a win paired with a Buffalo loss or tie, or even a tie if the Bills lose, while Jacksonville can seal the AFC South with a win and Houston loss or tie, or a tie of their own if the Texans lose. Pittsburgh has a similarly clean path in the AFC North, as a win or tie clinches the division, though they can still back in if Baltimore drops or ties their game, and Houston remains one of the most fascinating cases of all. With straightforward routes via win or tie, help from Indianapolis, or even a long-shot combination of results across both conferences that could still drag the Texans into the playoff field. With so many teams one result away from clarity, Week 17 has the feel of a pressure cooker, where contenders can either lock in their January plans or leave everything hanging until the very end. And as always, the number 1 rule remains the same: